Welcome to the West County Museum, located at 261 South Main Street in Sebastopol, California. The museum is one part of the Western Sonoma County Historical Society, and the other part is the Luther Burbank Experiment Farm on Bodega Avenue in Sebastopol. My name is Mary Dodgen, and I am the curator for this exhibit. We are here today to provide you with a brief video tour of this exhibit. We will not be giving all the details, saving things for you to see when you come visit us. You are going to see many women highlighted in this museum, starting with 1848, when the first convention of the suffrage women took place in Seneca Falls, New York. The leaders of that were Lucretia Coughlin Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. We will also cover the years through 1920 to when the 19th Amendment was ratified. This is a county-wide celebration of the anniversary of the 19th Amendment, 100 years ago. This is quite a historic time, but let us not forget the 72 years of debates, plays, meetings, and teas that preceded this. Those are the years that we represent here. The women on these walls are highlighted because of their key involvement in their organizational talents and belief in the cause. Each woman and their organizations had their own strategies and influences, but they all had the same goal in mind of getting the votes for women. The women you see in this section had a bigger battle. Not only were they women, but they were Black women. Twice the battle and twice the fight. They were leaders and organizers. Their organizations, some of them still exist. For example, Ida B. Wells, who founded the NAACP, which still exists. Their struggles, though, long exceeded the passing of the 19th Amendment. Here we have a copy of the Declaration of Independence from July 4th, 1776. And in the typewriter, text is being written on the Declaration of Sentiments. This was authored by Elizabeth Cady Stanton in 1848 and was presented at the Seneca Falls Convention. She basically took the Declaration of Independence and inserted the word woman or women in the appropriate places. She also had 18 grievances that were mentioned, which included no control over their wages and property or custody of their children, and also the lack of the vote. Here we have two copies of the Woman's Journal, dated 1872 and 1890. Lucy Stone is the editor and producer of this newspaper, and it dealt solely with women's issues. These two issues are filled with suffrage news from around the world. These are on loan from the collection of Michael Carnacki, and he has brought other ephemera, which he is going to present to us now.
Hi, I'm Michael Carnacki, and I'm here with you to share a little bit about my suffrage ephemera collection that's on loan here to the West County Museum. The first piece that I have on loan here is a check on the National American Women's Suffrage Association letterhead. It is dated June 13th, 1899. It is in the hand of Harriet Taylor Upton, who is the treasurer of that institution, and it is made out to the Tower Manufacturing and Novelty Company for $65.92 for stationery for press work. Down at the bottom, if you look here, it is signed by Susan B. Anthony and by Alice Stone Blackwell, who is Lucy Stone's daughter. The reason why I like to collect ephemera and what this type of collecting does for me is that I now have a physical connection to Susan B. Anthony in knowing that she also held this check in her hand when she made it out and signed it. So it's really an interesting way of connecting with anybody from the past if you have actually articles or ephemera that they've written. So in doing my research and trying to create a snapshot in time, as I like to call it, I was curious to know exactly about the Tower Manufacturing and Novelty Company. So through various auction sites and eBay, I was able to locate a invoice from, and if you can see here, it is Tower Manufacturing and Novelty Company. This is dated 1893, whereas the check is dated 1899, so there's a 6-year span of difference there, but I'm not thinking that they changed what they sold much. So it gives us an idea here. So they sell Tower's Best Lead Pencils, Tower's Bevel Rubber, Velvet Relief Paper, they do printing and engraving and lithographing, they do Velvet Crimson inks, barometer ink stands. So you can see that these women, in addition to what it says on the check of them getting stationery for press work, they were buying lots of things to help with their cause. Okay, next, in referring back to the check by the National American Women's Suffrage Association, signed by Susan B. Anthony and Alice Stone Blackwell, I was curious about the statement down here for the stationery for press work. So this was dated 1899, so I kind of did a Google search to find out exactly what Susan B. Anthony in particular was having published around that time. And I was really pleased to find that this is the actual publication of the Arena magazine. And so this is the kind of press work that she is probably talking about when she's writing these checks. And this particular issue of the Arena is dated May of 1897. So of course the check is 1899, so we're within 2 years of each other, so it's very close. And in this issue, on page 901, there is an article entitled The Status of Women, Past, Present, and Future by Susan B. Anthony. So what's interesting when reading the article, I found that one of her most famous quotes is there. And so I'll read to you from that quote. It says, and this is on page 904, which is just a few pages into the article, it says that there is not space to follow the history of the last 50 years and study the method by which those victories have been gained. But there is not 1 foot of advanced ground upon which women stand today that has not been obtained through the hard-fought battles of other women. So I really love that quote. It's one of my favorite quotes by Susan B. Anthony. And so again, it's a snapshot in time where you have 1897, you have the check, which is 1899, you have the Tower Manufacturing and Novelty Company invoice, which is 1893, and you have the Tower Manufacturing and Novelty envelope, which is dated 1900. So this is kind of a little snapshot in time that we can share of Susan B. Anthony's life and the women of the National American Women's Suffrage Association. So let's see, I'm going to move on to the next little piece of ephemera that I have on loan here. And this is an autograph book. And this is from 1871, 1872, and 1873 from Swarthmore College. And so in the very front page, one of the founding members was Lucretia Mott. And so she writes in here a little quotation that I'll read to you that is kind of what the women of their day did on autograph cards and calling cards and just blank pieces of paper that basically they would write one of their most famous quotes, and then they would sign it and date it. And so this one says, "No act is good that doth disturb thy peace, or can be bad which makes true joy increase." And it's signed by Lucretia Mott, you can see here, and it is 1871. Okay, so now we're on this side of the board that we were just on the opposite side of a minute ago. And this is another autographed quotation that is signed by Lucy Stone. And Lucy Stone, she was an avid protester with regard to women's right to vote. And she actually at one point in time refused to pay her taxes. And because she thought that, as this quotation says, by her, and I'm quoting it, reading it right from her quotation, it says, "Taxation without representation is tyranny, whether it is imposed upon man or woman." So she thought that because she didn't have the right to vote, that she was not being represented, and therefore she should not be taxed. So she refused to pay her property tax. Well, the marshal came and would seize her property and take it for sale in order to earn the monies to satisfy the tax lien that the government had put on her property. But she had it arranged so that her friends would go to the auction and buy back some of her stuff that was more prized, and she would actually end up ultimately in an indirect way paying the taxes anyways, because she was paying the marshal. But it was able to make her point. It did get her some good press, and it's very unique to find this actual quotation by Lucy Stone, written by her and signed by her. So this is the actual document that you'll be able to see here at the West County Museum. So I hope you all have a chance to come down and check it out. It's really great. So then if we go right directly below that, you have another autograph quotation by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who I think everybody knows who Elizabeth Cady Stanton is, so I don't need to give much explanation about who she is. But this particular quotation, you can see it's signed at the top, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and the quotation is, "Man and woman, a simultaneous creation." Okay, and then finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about this piece of ephemera by Frances Willard. There's two separate pieces, both signed by her. This one is on the National Women's Christian Temperance Union, to which she was the national president. It's dated 1890. It's written to William Bach, who was the editor of the Ladies' Home Journal. And she simply says, "Dear brother, I send you proof sheets of the speech. Yours sincerely, Frances Willard." And so the speech, not really clear what speech that was, but I think Mary is. Come on in here and tell us.
Yes, the speech that she had prepared was about the construction of the national headquarters that they were in the process of building. And unfortunately, William Bach did not pick up the story, but the Chicago Tribune did. And the full speech is included in the text of the article. So it's a very special collection piece that we have here. Alice Paul arrived on the suffrage scene in the late 1890s. She was a young woman, fresh ideas, and plenty of stamina. In 1913, she and Lucy Burns planned a large presence under the nose of President Wilson. Ellen Bowen, a local history enthusiast, is going to present this event in more detail.
Hail, Columbia! Of all the movies and plays and operas I've been in, Columbia is actually the role I'm the most famous for. My name is Hedwig Riker. I was born in Germany, but I've spent most of my life in the United States. My friend Alice Paul had an idea for this huge suffrage parade in Washington, D.C. No one had ever done anything like this before, and she asked me to participate. So of course I said yes. She chose the date of March 3rd, 1913 for the parade because it was the day before Woodrow Wilson would be inaugurated as president, and she knew there would be lots of people in town. Poor Mr. Wilson. When he stepped off the train platform that morning, he asked, "Where are all the crowds to greet me?" And he had to be told they were all on Pennsylvania Avenue watching the suffrage parade. Well, Alice planned this parade down to the smallest detail. Each group of women was going to be wearing distinctive capes. There would be sandwiches and coffee for the marchers along the parade. And as the parade progressed on the route, trumpets would announce their arrival. The parade would be led by Inez Mulholland. She's an attorney, and she would be riding on her white horse. Next would come a contingent led by Carrie Chapman Catt and the officers of the National American Woman Suffrage Association, followed by a float with a huge sign on it that said, "We demand an amendment to the U.S. Constitution enfranchising the women of this country." After that would be groups of women representing how women have worked together with men to build this country. Women from occupations and business and trades, each wearing clothing of what their work was. After them would be 1,000 college women wearing caps and gowns from their schools. And next would be club women and local and state suffrage associations. And then at the very last of the parade would be the suffrage pioneers. Can you picture it? It was going to be really impressive. The parade would end on the steps of the U.S. Treasury building, where there would be a pageant of Columbia, me, being paid homage by charity, hope, justice, and peace. It was going to be a spectacular event that no one had ever seen the likes of before. There were just two issues, though, that needed to be addressed. First, how would women of color, black women, participate? Oh, there was a lot of arguing back and forth. And ultimately, Alice Hall decided that each group would make its own decisions about racial representation. Ida B. Wells, a black suffragist, was furious. She said if she couldn't walk with the Illinois delegation, her home state, then she wasn't going to be in the parade at all. Well, 3 o'clock that afternoon, the parade's ready to start, and Ida B. Wells is nowhere to be found. The parade went ahead and started, the marchers started, and after a little bit, Ida B. Wells calmly steps from the crowd and joins the Illinois delegation and continues to march with them for the rest of the parade route. In the end, there was none of the disruption that was predicted about having black women participate. Now the second issue, that was a different story. That was the issue of security. The Washington, D.C. police maintained that that's not going to be a problem. Well, do you know how many people we had? We had 8,000 marchers and 500,000 people showed up as spectators. The Washington, D.C. police provided a few horsemen and also recruited a small army of Boy Scouts for crowd control. Fortunately, though, the organizers of our parade had thought ahead. One of our suffragists had a brother-in-law who was the outgoing Secretary of War, and she persuaded him to place an army regiment near the edge of the city, just in case they were needed. Well, it's a really good thing that they were there, because about halfway through the parade, the spectators broke through the police barricades and started accosting the women that were marching. They grabbed at them and grabbed at their clothes and grabbed at their signs and yelled at them. The police stood by and did nothing. The army quickly intervened. They pushed the crowds back and ensured the safety for the rest of the march. By the end of the day, 100 women had been hospitalized because of their injuries. Hours later, after that incident, the parade marchers finally made it to the U.S. Treasury building. And I and the rest of my pageant performers told the allegory of Columbia. It was inspiring. But the story doesn't end there. The mob behavior, the police lack of help, well, Alice Paul used that to boost the impact of this parade. The U.S. Senate held hearings into police misconduct and decided at the end that there was no one to blame for what happened. The Senate did nothing. But the parade, the news reports, and the Senate hearings were publicity that Alice Paul welcomed. You see, this whole event kick-started the campaign for women's suffrage, the Women's Suffrage Amendment. And now, you know the story of the famous photo of me as Columbia, personification of the United States.
This banner, this 18-foot long banner, is a replica of the one Alice Paul created in Washington, D.C. She would keep track of the states as they ratified the 19th Amendment. So 36 stars were needed, as 36 states were needed to ratify the amendment. This was sewn by our local people in July of 2019 at an old-fashioned sewing bee in Sebastopol. Each individual hand-sewed a star on this banner. In Washington, D.C., when the final star was placed, Alice Paul was on the second story and she unfurled it to the ground and to the cheers of the celebration of all 36 states being represented. In 1896, Susan B. Anthony organized and orchestrated a large push to try and get the proposition passed in California that year. She called in all of her constituents, guest speakers, women who could pass the word along for gaining the votes in California. Elizabeth Upham Yates visited and gave a speech at Jansen's Hall. She invited men and women to attend this free presentation, and she spoke on the equality of women. They wanted men to attend this meeting because they had the vote, and the women wanted them there because they wanted them to hear what she had to say. Okay, also in 1896, a Republican County Convention was being held at Jansen's Hall. The room was filled with political delegates and townfolk. The newspapers quoted one man as saying, "It's best you attend the convention or you may be nominated without your knowledge." The room was filled. When the afternoon session was resumed, A large group of women were now in attendance. The gavel was laid and the room became silent. The women escorted Mrs. Hurlbut to the podium, and she was given the attention of all present. She asked that the Republican Party put the suffrage question on their platform in the next election, and her request was greeted with cheers. So we know in 1896 the proposition was defeated in California. So Susan B. Anthony explained that it was due to the lack of education on the subject. I want to tell you about two more local women later on in the crusade who spoke out for suffrage. Maud Churchman was a member of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, and she worked feverishly for temperance. That was her agenda. But the women knew that they needed the vote for their voices to be heard or to make any kind of changes in the laws. So they began working very hard for the votes for women. She would belong to and give reports at the Women's Christian Temperance Union conferences, reporting on the suffrage department and what great work was being accomplished. She also authored and read 3 papers at different times between the years of 1904 and 1917. One was called The Bible for Women. The next was called The California Voice. And the final one was called The California Dream Come True. While we don't know what the words were exactly, I think we can very well assume that she was talking about women's suffrage in these topics. The laws were very contradicting between married women and single women. Single women were allowed to own property, make contracts in their names, and retain income from their wages. By the age of 23, Althea Harmer had completed all of those. In 1903, she graduated from Santa Rosa College and was employed by the Sebastopol Times. With her wages, she purchased property in Sebastopol and paid taxes on it. The laws were unfair. She wondered, why should women not be allowed to vote if she obeyed all the laws of the men? She was a perfect example of why women needed the vote, and she was asked in 1911 to give a talk at the Women's Christian Temperance Convention in that year. You've heard me mention Jansen's Hall a couple of times this afternoon, and Jansen's Hall was located in Sebastopol on the corner of McKinley and Main Street. The building is still there. It has been nominated for a Pomeroy Award as a site where suffrage activity took place. The building is currently owned by the Oddfellows, and it was purchased in 1923 from Adelaide Jansen, hence the name Jansen's Hotel. So we've covered quite a few pieces of information here, and not giving you all the details. We want to save something for you to see when you are able to come visit this exhibit. So I want to thank Ellen Bowen and Michael Karnacki and John Four, our filmer, for putting this virtual tour together. Thank you.